We will see who joins today. Yes, hello, hello, and welcome.
Hello.
A lot of our friends in the cold zones where you are probably staying inside, I hope, nice and warm. Welcome,
Mm,
welcome, everyone. Dean joining in from Manchester, and so many of you. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm joined this morning by a very special guest. Annette Gendler is part of our general community here in Substack, and a fabulous writer herself with a published memoir and another published book, really speaking to us as family historians looking to put together our stories with, yes, thank you, Sarah Beth, a few suggestions for me, with her book, How to Write Compelling Family Stories. And I think the compelling part is the
mhm.
really interesting part here, because as we all know, there's lots of tools at our disposal today that were never true, never available, never true before. And now we're scrambling around with new ways to do this. So first of all, welcome to these events, and it's a delight to have you, Annette. So
Thank you.
tell us a little bit about what brought you into the community here on Substack, what you are looking to do, and about the work that you post on Substack.
I joined Substack almost 2 years ago. And my main reason was because I've been blogging since I want to say 2011. So I'm used to writing on a regular basis, putting out nice posts, etc. But, that was on my WordPress uh, site. And then I would send out a newsletter separately through, uh, I think, Aweber was my service. And more writers that I know were talking about Substack.
Mhm.
And then I started learning, Substack's not only a platform to send out a newsletter, send out your posts to your audience, but it also has this social network aspect where you can find your people like Barbara.
Mhm.
So to me, that was the main reason, I'm not doing anything much different than I used to do basically on my website. But it's a more fertile ground, right? So I came here to meet more people who are enthused about uh, stories from family history.
Yeah, yeah. It's interesting that you say that, because I think the nature of this equation has changed in the
Mhm.
years, really, since about 25 years or so, since the early aughts. And, first we had websites, and then we had various forms of blogs. Then we started integrating them into newsletters. We've had newsletters since they were mailed.
Yes,
and,
we
and
did.
the ways in which these integrate, and it was probably by the late aughts and then early teens that we figured out that, oh, social media can pull people into blogs they might not ever have seen. And
Right.
in the last 3 years, the whole social media environment has, shall we say, blown up in the sense of gone through a bit of a revolution, I'll put it that way.
Yes.
And many people are fleeing toxic environments where the social has itself become very divisive. I won't go into politics. It doesn't matter. What it is certainly is divisive. And finding other ways to find community and keep that, engage that community to stay focused on the topics has gotten very
Mhm.
interesting. And it depends on what you're trying to accomplish and where you are. But that's kind of the point, I'll say. I've been
Mhm.
delighted at how adjacent communities move in and out of this world, which I kind of love. Culinary history, for example,
Mhm.
has been another one that just, let's talk about food. Before we got started, we were talking about language.
Right.
So tell me a little bit about language and culture. Kind of how did that work into your moving into a memoir, and where was that going in your own memoir?
So when you talk about language, so my difficulty in writing my own story was that, well, as you know, I'm bilingual. I grew up in Germany mainly, but I have an American mother. And so I always spoke two languages. And my family is from more than one country, more than one uh, language family. And I think a lot of genealogists can relate to that, right? Because you have lots of documents in other languages, whether it's official documents, whether it's letters. So one of the challenges for me when I wrote my memoir, Jumping Over Shadows, is that it's basically two stories. Um, it's my own sort of unlikely love story between me, someone of partly German descent, falling in love with my husband, who's a Jew, and the whole legacy of the Holocaust and all of that in post-war Germany. Um, so, um, but the interesting thing for me was that that had happened in my family before. I had a great aunt who had been married to a Jewish man in Czechoslovakia before World War II, and that became quite difficult, as you can imagine, once Czechoslovakia became slowly but surely part of Nazi Germany, and the persecution of Jews started, and the Holocaust, and all of that. So I was just struck by the fact that this story seems to be repeating itself, and so my memoir is really contrasting my story with her story, and so a lot of my source material was my grandfather's memoirs. I was lucky enough that my grandfather was a writer, a poet mainly, and a short story writer. And he, late in his life, in the late 50s, wrote a chapter in particular about his sister. And so that was my main source material, but it's in German. So my challenge was, how do I make translation is one thing, right? But you don't want to be quoting another writer in your own writing. I mean, you can do quotes here and there, but not whole swaths, right? Because then you're handing over the microphone. And you have to, all of it needs to be framed in a context that makes sense to your audience, in my case, an American audience. So that was my challenge, to take that source material, figure out, which was great source material. I mean, some of his, that was replete with metaphors and all of that, and some of them I carried on. Like one of the main chapters in the book is about the family's deportation uh, from Czechoslovakia into West Germany after the war, and he had written about that in a letter that was not actually meant as a story. It was basically just a report written to friends of what had happened. But in that letter, he refers to their arrival in what was a small town in sort of the Frankfurt area, as it was like a scene from The Flying Dutchman. And I was like, oh my God, like, so I sold that. Like, the story is called The Flying Dutchman because that
Uh-huh.
it captures this sort of cursed ship arriving at yet another port, being like, where are we? What's going on? So I had great source material, but still, I had to make it work in another language for an audience,
Yeah,
in another time and in another cultural context.
right. So that outlook about an audience, about something that comes through very well in your book, um,
Mm.
in hooking the audience and helping them really see what see through their eyes, see the story through their eyes, and understand what context they need to understand. Can you talk a little bit about that in terms of both what you've done with the book, this book, the how-to book,
Mm.
um, from the experience of your memoir, and then what you bring into your workshops?
So for Jumping Over Shadows, I had to learn, and this I really learned through a lot of feedback from the writing groups in my MFA program that I was in at the time, was that, even though this is in part a historical memoir, it's not a history book. So,
Hmm.
for instance, historical information needs to be brought in very sparingly, like just
Yeah.
enough so we know where we're at and what's going on, right? So there was a lot of material that I had gleefully written because I love history and I loved looking it up, what exactly happened. It was also interesting to me. So this is one thing I talk about in my workshops when you're looking at source material like my grandfather. So this is a first person account. And he writes about, let's talk about the deportation. So this is something that happened to him personally. And he cites details like, for instance, how many kilos of luggage are allowed to take on. But before I put that in my book, I need to verify that because it's a verifiable historical event, right? So, that's when I dug into the history books and other eyewitness accounts, which was fascinating. In Munich, there's an archive that collected eyewitness reports of those deportations. So I dug into that to get, other people's experiences to be able to round out sort of the scenery because it's basically a story of being on a train going to where you don't know where you're going, right? Being uprooted. And also just bringing in enough uh, detail that makes it a vivid story. And then also any detail that I quoted, I verified by the history books. And that in turn told me that my grandfather was a reliable narrator because what he quoted in terms of how much luggage, for instance, they were able to take, I found exactly in the history books, because they basically put up posters around the town, all Germans need to gather here and there and they can bring this and that, right? So a history book just republished those
Mhm.
types of posters. So that in
Mhm.
terms of writing a historical uh, a story that's historically verifiable is very important that you,
Yeah.
yeah, verify as much as you can, and
Mhm.
also get that confirmation whether or not your relative is a reliable narrator, because quite often they're not. Right, that happens too. That you start researching a story, and a lot of it you cannot verify, and some of it turns out to be false, right? And so then, and that's a question I get quite often in my workshops also. What do I do when the family story that we've taught all these years turns out to be at best fabricated, right? Um, to me, then the question is why?
Right.
Why are we fabricating this story? Like what,
Right.
right?
That's
What is it about?
the
Because that
myth.
tells you
Yeah.
that tells you a lot about the characters,
And what their pressures were.
what their pressures were. Sometimes you dig up, in my case also, you dig up a secret, then you got to ask yourself, secrets that they were there for a reason. People kept information hidden, falsified papers, right? Like we found recently, we were doing genealogical research on my father-in-law, and we found a whole slew of completely false papers because, he had to hide where he was from because he was trying to survive. So, so it's always, to me, those types of family history stories are always a product of many sources and
Right.
sometimes a big void that you kind of have to explain. Try to
Yeah.
explain.
We've I will look it up before I reference the name, but there's a wonderful post, I want to say Nate, wonderful post out there about brick walls may not actually be brick walls. They may be a ghost, essentially. Someone tried to hide something with an
Mhm.
intentionality. Why did they try to
Right,
hide it? That's the
right.
interesting part of the story. My family is
Exactly.
full of lies, myths, and hidden facts. And
Mhm.
I haven't run across fake documents yet, but I don't know. I haven't discovered that
Or,
yet.
incomplete documents,
Yeah.
where I have this whole story about the gravestone that exists in the Czech Republic of my family, which only has, so there are two families buried there, and they're basically in-laws of each other. So one part is the Jewish family, and the other part is the non-Jewish family. They're buried in the same grave, which is already very odd. But and it's also the Czech family and the German family, which is kind of a sort of a subsequent like categorization. And the reason is that the gravestone itself only reads the Czech name. Why is that? Because my dad's cousin, the top part of the family that stayed behind, um, he had the German name taken off because German graves were vandalized all the time because, after the war. So, so that was the protective measure, right? So you have to go to the cemetery office and then you have to ask, which I did, for the list of people who are buried, and then you will get it's a it's an urn there, sorry, and then you will get the full list. But even on that list, it doesn't tell you who's Jewish and who's not. That's the oral history that we didn't write down where, because Jews were not technically allowed to be properly buried in any way, shape, or form in 1938, for instance. So to me, that story of this like one grave on what you even find in documents, what it says on the gravestone, like all of those seem to be verifiable documents, but they only tell half the story.
Right. As you tell this story and thinking about, I think we're pretty much contemporaries here, thinking about our parents' experiences after the last great World War, World War II, and actually even the major wars after that, um, having the opportunity to capture those parts of those stories, we have a rare opportunity here. So many of
Mm.
us, have touched those stones, and it's very raw. It's still difficult for them to talk about. There are things that we can get to talk about that, to better understand that. I'm curious what you're working on now, and has that
Mm.
been a further area of exploration for you?
Yeah, so having sort of, organized my own story, like the most dramatic part. People always ask me, so are you going to write another story about your life? And I'm like, I hope not, because I hope it's not that dramatic. Although then my kids are like, I want to know this, I want to know that. So, that remains to be seen. But right now, my siblings and I started getting together. And this is how you and I sort of connected, as I was talking about. I started meeting. Let me back off. So my father died very suddenly when we were 21. When I was 21, my siblings were even younger. And the 40th anniversary of his death came up last year, and last March, actually. And my sister was like, we should do something for this. She wanted me to, my sister lives in Germany, my brother in Austria. So she's like, could you come? And I'm like, first of all, I didn't feel like coming. Secondly, flights are very expensive. Thirdly, um, it's not really a celebratory thing. Like, what are we going to do? So we ended up doing it was a Sunday by happenstance. So we ended up doing a group WhatsApp call. And then I suggested, well, why don't we spend some of that time on that call doing sort of a write-in? So this is my writer teacherly thing. And in my family also, I'm obviously the writer who writes the stories. And why don't we sort of write a little bit about what that experience was like, when we got the call, because our father died from a sudden cardiac arrest on a business trip with my mom. I was in the United States at the time. My siblings were in other places. And even though we went through that trauma together, we were not each other's support person. We had friends or neighbors who were like, we didn't talk to each other like, so what was that like for you? So we ended up now we meet once a month. We call it the Dad Project. And initially it was about reconstructing the event of his death, which was really interesting because each one of us, A, had a different experience, B, was involved in different parts of it, C, has different documents. So my sister, for instance, our mother passed 2 years ago, but my sister's has mom's old diaries, like not diaries in the sense of lots of stories, but date book,
Journals,
like,
date book.
yeah,
Yeah.
where she wrote down, going to the doctor today, doing this and that and the other. And they're pretty detailed. So, I have other documents. My brother has all the pictures, like the autopsy report, like all that stuff. So we sort of worked together to piece together, how it all went down, because each one of us had, had seen different parts of it. And now and through that process, we started talking about all the stuff we have from our dad. So he left a pretty solid, what my brother calls sound archive, because my dad was a PhD student at Purdue in the late 50s, early 60s. And he and his parents, so he was the only surviving child, and he and his parents, who were stuck back in Wiesbaden, Germany, would send each other tapes on which they would record classical concerts they had listened to and loved. And then with whatever space was left on the tape, they would talk to each other. And sometimes they sent each other just sort of like what we would call a voice message these days, right? So we have those voice messages. So yeah. So, but my brother, of course, had to digitize them because they're on these old things, right, that nobody can listen to anymore. So in the summer, we had a session. Now if I start crying, it's because it's so moving. But we had a session where where we listened to the first tape that we listened to was a message from our dad, who's 27 at the time, to his dad, who was turning 70. And it's basically a happy birthday message. And in that voice message, he says, I hope that one day, if I have children, I would have as wonderful a relationship with them that I have with you. And we're sitting there listening to this, each one of us, on a different continent. We're in different continents, right? We're on a WhatsApp call and we're like bawling. We're like, hi, we're here, So it was, to me, listening to that artifact that he left. And I think that's part of what your community does and what you do is capturing those messages from the past, right? And I mean, that was just that, if my dad hadn't done that, and if those things hadn't survived, right? Like that was such a gift to be able to feel like my dad is talking to me, 40. I mean, he recorded this in 61. And, we're listening to it. I can't even think, like X amount of years later, right? Like I think that speaks a bit to the power of
Yeah.
leaving something behind, like leaving your love between, like the love you have for your parents, like leaving something like that.
You know, our parents were, I mean, thank you. That was such an amazing story. I'm thinking about my stepdad and when he passed very suddenly. And I
Mhm,
mean, we're all, all thinking about these kinds of stories in our own lives. Um, but also, our parents, my stepdad was a hacker nerd in his day. Always, we had quadraphonic stereos and reel to reel tape, the whole nine yards. And I can't think of any recordings of his voice, my stepdad's voice,
mm,
despite all of that equipment. Fast forward to where we are, and frankly, what we're doing right now.
mhm,
We are in this generation the first time to be, we and 20 years back or so, able to create these artifacts for future generations. Even just this conversation recorded, the conversations that you have with your siblings. Tell me these are recorded.
they're
You're,
not.
oh,
See,
do
there you
me a
go, right
favor,
there you go.
push the button.
Yeah, and that's the thing. It's not just it's one thing to record it, right? It's another how what we talk about most of the time is how are we going to make what we're creating now accessible, right? Because in my lifetime, I used to and I was just telling my daughter, I used to send cassettes with voice messages, which I still have, to my siblings, and they would send them back to me because it was so expensive.
Right.
Transatlantic phone calls, right? I mean, I'm sure you have the same thing. Like, was so expensive.
$50 a
Now,
pop. Come on, man.
right? Like now, I have to make a special effort to, I have postcards that I'm transcribing that my grandfather wrote as a World War I soldier for the Austrian American Empire, right? Like, it's just a piece of paper, but that lives on. but our recordings, right? Like, where are they? And are they going to be, are they going to go the way of the CD drive? Like, so.
Those kinds of technical topics, see, I could talk your ear off about that. And
Mm,
part of what I think is so important in this as a community, as a group of people all kind of rowing in the same direction, is that we
mm,
can help each other with that. I'm clueless on actually writing the story and feeling confident about the hook and the story, but how to be preserving those materials. At least I have no idea what will happen 100 years from now, but I
right.
do have a few ideas about where the general trends are going and what can be done and how to preserve and protect that. And always multiple copies. When in doubt, multiple copies. And your brother is right about digitizing. We'll talk about that later. We have a couple of fabulous questions that have popped up. I didn't want to interrupt you because that was just
No,
gold.
bring
One
them
of
on.
which Kristen popped in with to say, first of all, hello. She's
Oh,
loved both of your books, and asked if they were translated into German, particularly your memoir. Has it been translated into German?
it has not. I've gotten that question a bunch of times, um, mainly because I wasn't willing to pay for it. um, and no German publisher came knocking on my door. Let's put it that way. My brother has also been on my case about that because he said you could just run the manuscript through Google Translate. I'm like, uh, so I have a little bit to say about that because you also asked me about AI earlier on. Because I did after our mother died, we siblings. It's not the first project we're doing together, but we did basically a book about her life. It's mainly a photo book, but there are a bunch of essays in there. There's a her life story, and then there's an essay in there that I wrote about her, and the two actually. Anyway, so because we're a bilingual family, and my family reads mainly English, my siblings' families read mainly German. So we produced the book in both languages. So I write in English, but I can write in German. It's just not my literary language. So I did the Google Translate thing, which I have to say, I mean, I did this more than a year ago. So the quality is probably even better now. I have to say, the quality was, in terms of correctness, about 95% there. The
Mhm.
difficulty is when you do a literary translation, the voice was not, right? I
Yeah,
was reading this,
right.
I read a German translation of my own stuff, and I'm like, doesn't sound like me. I mean, it's not wrong, but it
Right.
doesn't sound like me. And then you ask yourself, well, what do I sound like? So I
Well,
think that, as a writer, for me, that's important, right? So I had to go
right.
through those texts a bunch of times until I got them to where, like, okay, this is how I think my writing should sound in German because this is how I express myself in German.
Yeah.
So that would be the difficulty. That's a long answer to,
No,
unfortunately,
but
a short
I
question.
I I hear that as, yeah. So at some point it will come, and these all this technology. Uh, there's no question it can help, and whether it's a boost or where you use it exactly how, you will find a way. But I'm thrilled to hear you thinking about that voice, and you uniquely have that gift of a voice in both languages. And it's a wonderful thing that you can find that as opposed to people just getting business books translated into auto translated into other languages, which can be very
Right.
awkward.
I mean, it's definitely better than nothing, but it's
Yeah, yeah,
not where it needs to be. And that's, I think, is
yeah.
the art of literary translation, which I
That's right.
certainly
Not the
have not
same thing.
mastered at all.
Yeah, not the same thing. Another fan of yours, Dr. Mary Marshall, chimes in, also has both of your books, not mentioning your children's story. We can come back to that one too.
Mhm.
We're
Yeah,
near the end of time, but who cares?
that's fine.
Also points points out, referring to the artifacts that we collect as families, and I think also referring to the recordings and things. Those artifacts are so important to those of us who've never met our ancestors' editors. I have recorded video of my mother who never knew who her great grands and now great great grands. And I
Mm.
chime in on that one too. I never knew my grandmother. I never knew most of my cousins and certainly any of the great grands. And am really on a journey in discovering all of them. But I'm following a pathway written down by my grandmother, again, whom I
Mm.
never met in living memory. And
Yeah.
it is, I suppose, in a way, why I am attuned particularly to that sense of generations forward and generations backward. So, each of these. So, I mentioned your children's book. So, tell us a little bit about what led to that, and again, what that was like in storytelling for a different kind of audience.
Yeah. That book was something I really wanted to preserve mainly for my own children. It's based on my mother-in-law's life as a hidden child during the Holocaust in France. We did a trip with her. She was already very ill with cancer, but we did a trip with her in 2009. So the year before she passed. We went back to this even in 2009, this was a very rural place, about 100 kilometers outside of Paris, like southwest of Paris. And so my kids, the whole family were together. So my kids witnessed her in that. It's really a hamlet. There's not even a traffic light. Um, but I wanted to preserve there were a couple of stories that she always told. I mean, she was a girl from age 6 to 10 when she was a hidden child. So she was a kid, right? And a kid has kid memories. But sh there were a couple of there's like one sort of really dramatic story that she always told, and I felt that that this is the Holocaust, right? Like her mother died in Auschwitz. This is my children's story. That's their heritage, and it should be preserved in a way that can carry forward. So, since this was a child's story with a child's point of view, it was obvious to me it needs to be a children's book. Now, I've written a memoir, I've written a how-to book. Writing a children's book's a whole nother deal, whole nother deal. So that was the challenge for me. That was sort of the excitement, and it took me quite some time to figure out how to write that. I got stuck on it a bunch of times. I had editors who led me down the wrong path, yada, yada. Um, but eventually I had the manuscript where I thought, okay, I'm going to self-publish this because it needs to be our book. It needs to be my book. And I found a wonderful book designer who helped me set up the thing, was a specialist in children's illustrated books. And I found a wonderful, through her, basically actually a website. She just told me which one is like hireabookdesigner.com, like hire an illustrator.com. I mean, so simple, right? That's where I found this dude who lives somewhere in England, has
Mhm.
nothing to do with Jewish history at all. It's not a writer, but he was the perfect illustrator for this book. So
Right.
for me, putting that book together, uh, again, going back to what we talked about earlier, it took a lot of, I mean, I had the story, but I needed to get all the underpinnings, because this takes place in 1944. When exactly did the Americans arrive? How many Germans were there? What did their uniform look like? So I'll show you the book cover here.
There you go. And I'll again drop that in the notes. Natalie and the
Yes.
Nazi soldiers.
Right. So
Yeah.
for instance,
Oh, it's
if you're showing Nazi soldiers, right, like that uniform needs to be correct.
that's right. And it needs to not
So
terrify the kid either. Yeah.
yes, but it also needs to be, for instance, so I had all my kids involved, particularly my sons, because they were around more. And my youngest son, for instance, because I was trying to decide between two illustrators, and I had them draw a sort of sample scene from the book to make the decision. And my younger son picked picked this one because he said he conveys it like he said, well, in this one book it's just two soldiers looking around. In the other one, it looks scary, and it's supposed to because it's a scary situation. So for me, in the back of the book has, well, I'll show you because for genealogists, mainly like that's sort of the so I have a map in your honor,
Uh-huh.
right? Where exactly this little hamlet was.
Town.
And then I have a sort of an author's note that gives you the the fuller family background. But all the family people that show up in that story are real and
Yeah.
based on photographs that we have, which again is hard because if you're a hidden person, you're not going to have photographs.
Funny thing about that. Yeah. Can I ask you to send me screenshots that you're comfortable with my sharing in the notes so that people see
Yes,
what, because it's hard to see on the screen. That's,
yes, I will.
what I get immediately out of that cover that I think is so perfect is the body language. You know,
Mm,
I know you were careful to get the soldier's uniform correct. To me, the compelling part is the angle of his back and the way he's staring down at the child. That right there says to the child, this is scary, but the child's pose is strong and confident. I want my
mhm,
daughter to read that book. My kids are in their 30s, but
yeah,
it's a little thing.
but it's
Yeah.
yeah, and it conveys. That's the fascinating part about doing an illustrative book is that
Yeah.
it conveys so much through the images. So that's also what makes it hard. We were fiddling with the text once the illustrations were in already, right? Because there were
Right.
pieces of text you can take out because the picture says it.
Right. Right. Images are, a whole nother language, just like video is a whole nother language.
Right.
Gosh, this has been fantastic, Annette. I am so grateful to
Thank
you
you.
for taking the time. It's lovely to get to know you. I am fascinated by this story you are working on with your siblings. I would encourage
Yes.
you to just find a platform. Zoom will do it. Even Substack will do it. Even privately will do it to capture and record those. And those MP4 files, they seem really big. Storage is stupid cheap. It really is.
True.
If you think
Yes.
about the value of what you are creating of those moments, they want to hear your voice. And we are privileged for the opportunity to see behind the curtain, to get to know you and learn so much in just a little segment. Thank you, and I think our whole
Thank you.
audience here appreciates
Thanks for
that as
having me.
well.
I really, and I know, I mean, that's why I came to Substack, right? To meet people like you.
Oh, oh, that's lovely to hear, and it's kind of the reason I came too. So it's
There you go.
it's what we're doing, and we're branching beyond Substack itself. I feel real strongly about that, about finding ways to make it easier for people who are working in their long form media to not have to move that, but yet still participate in the strength of this. Let's get out of the platform battles and just talk to each other because that's what's really important
Right.
here. So,
Right. And I'm noodling on offering another workshop pretty soon. So anyone who's follows me will find out and we can connect more and work more. And thank you for the you should record these sessions. I don't know if my siblings would want to record everything, but you're right. Like some of the things are so obvious that you don't do them because they're too obvious.
right. For all that I do here, it hadn't occurred to me either. And my brother-in-law came up with the idea of having a storytelling session for my father-in-law to tell scary stories at Halloween to our children, and of stories of China that he remembers as a child from the
Mm,
1920s and 30s. And he structured it, gave him a couple of slides to keep him on story. It was
wow.
fantastic. He hasn't done another one, and I keep nudging him, and there's only so much I can do with my father-in-law, but, getting that kind
Wow.
of thing, I love that.
Yeah.
And my cousin, I am the youngest of all my first cousins. My eldest cousin is going to join me in our private Substack. You lock down a Substack and do these podcasts to talk about stories of us as kids, all living people. I don't really want that public, but that's okay. We don't. within us, among us, we know we don't want to share that. That's okay. We control the video. It's that kind of thing that can really help to get these stories across. So
Good
thank
point.
you. Thank you all.
Thank you. Have a
We'll
good
stay in
rest of your
touch.
Sunday. Bye.
You too. Get out there and get some rest and stay warm, all of you here on the eastern United States, in particular, middle, across the Americas, up you in Canada too. Stay warm.
Yeah.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.